Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and all the better because you're joining me tonight for part 3 of our incredible story. And what a fascinating story it is. We're learning about the bizarre way in which this poor woman's family has died, and so we're understanding that there are demonic roots related to a curse that had been put on the family that appeared to be responsible for the deaths of all these family members. So let's continue with our story, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with tonight's story. Once again, Dr. Bernstone leaned forward in his chair, as if he was completely riveted by the story I was telling him. I was in no uncertain doubt that he saw many patients much like myself during the day, who probably poured out their hearts to him, as I was doing so now. But I very much doubt what they told him was anything near as paradoxical or outlandish as what I was sharing with him. Mine was a story you just could not forget. "Well, you know what they say about cats and dogs, Lisa," Dr. Bernstone said reflectively. "They're very sensitive to energy, are they not? You say that Pringle, your mother's cat, was staring at one corner of the kitchen, at something you personally could not physically see. But you sensed an entity as well, so there must have been something there." "That's exactly right, Dr. Bernstone. When Pringle bolted straight out of the kitchen, as if he couldn't get away fast enough, I had such a sinking, hollow feeling deep down in my gut. I think at that poignant moment, I was fearing the very worst, but hoping for the best, if you know what I mean. I did sense there was an evil presence in the house. It felt demonic, and I was afraid of what this evil might have done to my family, especially after my mother had recently conveyed to me that she had seen the dark-winged creature in her nightmares, rather like a harbinger of death. I had a profound sense in that moment that the life I had known and loved had now dissipated before my very eyes, like the smouldering smoke from a cigar that disappears into the ether and is remembered no more. I guess I just knew things would never ever be the same again. It was almost like I was a character in the chapter of a thriller story that was too scared to turn the next page, as when I turned that page, there'd be no going back. The only way I can describe it to you, Dr. Bernstone, is a deep sense of knowing consumed my every thought." "From what you're sharing with me, Lisa, it sounds like you picked up on emanacious energy very quickly, even though human beings might not be as sensitive as animals are. I think some intuitive human beings, such as yourself, Lisa, if they're discerning enough, can almost certainly pick up on energy, especially one that is not auspicious. So go on with your story, will you?" "Well, for a start, Dr. Bernstone, I think I should make you understand my family dynamics a little better, to fully appreciate my story. Just so you know, my sister and brother were much younger than me. My mother had me when she was only 16 years old with my father. I was an accidental, unplanned pregnancy. My parents were childhood sweethearts that eventually got married, so it stands to reason my siblings are significantly younger than I was. Kate was 14. Errol was about 10. Kate and Errol were always rambunctiously noisy, playing music loudly around the house and running around the place, that kind of thing. So on Sunday mornings, the house always had a bustling, upbeat, vibrant energy. But on that morning, the kitchen was as clean as a whistle, and that in itself was decidedly strange. I suppose I expected to see a breakfast table dressed with a red and white gingham tablecloth, covered in glasses with half-drunk orange juice, and a box of Cheerios on the table, next to a pitcher of milk. I expected to see dishes yet to be cleared away by my mother, but everything was absolutely spotless. I'd usually smell bacon in the air on a Sunday morning, along with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread, but there were no smells from a breakfast having been recently served. Nothing had been touched. And in that moment, Dr. Bernstone, I just knew something wasn't right. I just knew it, with every fibre of my being. I called out my parents' names. "Mum! Dad!" I cried out. "Errol! Kate! Where are you? There was no sign of movement in the house, not a beat from anyone, although the unsettling feeling of being watched persisted. I frantically ran through the rooms in the house, racing up the stairs as fast as I could, looking for any signs of my family. I'm telling you, Dr. Bernstone, my heartbeat was booming in my ears so loudly it drowned out any other noises that I might have heard. You have no idea how terrified I was. The sense of foreboding around the house seemed to loom over me like a nasty, very vile, repugnant smell. When I dashed up that staircase, I truly sensed that something was following me. So I quickly glanced down the staircase, and I'm so sure that in my peripheral vision I saw a menacing dark shadow, but it drifted away before I got a chance to take a really good look at it. But I just know something was there. I just know it. I'm in no doubt of that. I knew something had been watching me, Dr. Bernstone. Something profoundly evil.
How awful, Lisa. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you.
I don't even want to go there, Dr. Bernstone. I really don't. Even remembering that day makes me feel cloyingly sick. My parents' bedroom was closed when I reached it. That was the surprising thing, for that time of the morning. I gingerly knocked on the door and said, "Mum, Dad, are you in there?" There was no answer. I could hear the television was on, and for a moment I thought it was the sound of my parents talking. I really did. But I soon realized it was the television that was speaking. I remember it must have been some kind of drama on television, because I heard the voice on the television saying, "Don't worry, Errol, we'll sort it out for you. I'll speak about the matter to your grandmother." I never ever forgot those words, Dr. Bernstone, because my brother is called Errol, and for a brief second it sounded like my mother was talking to him. I so wanted to believe that, Dr. Bernstone, with the last smidgen of hope that I had left. I told myself my parents had slept in late, and that both my brother and sister had cycled to town to have milkshakes at the local parlour, which they sometimes did for a special treat. But I think before I even opened that door, I knew exactly what I would find. But let's just say nothing prepares you for tragedy when it stares you right in the face so blatantly.
And that was when you found your family, Lisa. Is that right?
That's right, Dr. Bernstone. Oh, it was just too dreadful. They were lying there fast asleep on the bed. Only they weren't asleep. They were dead. I knew at once. But I did run over to them, and one by one I tried to wake them up from their slumber. But they were long gone. It was like trying to wake up a dead weight, because when someone dies, Dr. Bernstone, they become a lot heavier. I never knew that, you know. I remember screaming and screaming, and then I heard this strange cackling laughter in the bedroom with me. It was the most horrendous, deplorable laugh I've ever heard in my entire life. It was as if something was standing there, watching me, enjoying my grievous despair. At first I thought I imagined that laugh, but something was definitely there in the room with me. I could tangibly feel it. And not only that, the room was as cold as a freezer. I'd never known my mother's room to be that cold, especially on such a warm day. I knew this entity was in some way heinously responsible for my family's death, and this was all connected to the curse that my mother's Haitian friend Anna had callously inflicted on our family. I tell you, Dr. Bernstone, I wanted to grab this evil entity by the neck. If only I could see him and squeeze his neck so hard that there'd be nothing left of him. I was enraged, Dr. Bernstone, absolutely furious. But how can you fight against something you just can't physically see? It's like chasing after the invisible man. You just can't do it, can you?
I can't imagine, said Dr. Bernstone. I am rather surprised if your mother's cat Pringles, who always hangs around your mother as you say, was not found there in the bedroom as well. Deceased, I mean, if the door to the room was closed. What I wonder is how did that cat manage to get out?
Well, she could have meowed for a start, and my mother could have let her out that way, but there was a tiny gap in the bathroom window that was open. But it didn't have enough air coming through it to neutralise the carbon monoxide poisoning. But I dare say Pringle escaped through that opening. I'm sure of it, actually. I told you how she reacted with the evil presence in the kitchen. If she'd felt that same presence in the bedroom, She'd have bolted out of that place as fast as she possibly could. And I imagine she'd have taken the route by the window. It wouldn't have been any problem for her to jump out of that window.
So what exactly do you think happened to your family, Lisa? How do you personally believe they died?
Well, that's a good question. I've thought about it so often, Dr. Bernstone. You have no idea. I believe they were casually watching television together, all of them cuddled up in the bed, eating popcorn, drinking pop, that sort of thing. They probably became woozy, lost their concentration, and slowly but surely fell asleep, and then died. But I think the curse Anna inflicted on my family was behind their nefarious deaths. I really do. I'm telling you, Dr. Bernstone, as weird as it sounds, there was something in that room with me, like there had been in the kitchen moments before. I believe it followed me up from the kitchen to my parents' bedroom. I think it was the winged creature. I really do. And that thing wiped my family out, making their deaths look like a tragic accident.
I'm very sorry, Lisa, said Dr. Bernstone sympathetically. Very, very sorry indeed that you had to witness such an appalling sight. It must have been absolutely devastating for you to find your family all lying deceased on your parents' bed. I would not wish such a sight on my worst enemy. I couldn't think of anything worse, and it is not something you will ever forget in a hurry. But the good news is that things will get easier with time for you, and it's very good to talk about these things. By the sounds of things, there was much more than carbon monoxide poisoning going on. There was, to my mind, an insidious evil that had been conjured up in that house of yours by that Haitian woman Anna, who wished to put a curse on your family. I believe they died in that one room because there were no prayers that had been prayed in there. No holy water had been sprinkled. I find that very interesting indeed, and revelatory to say the very least. If I were to share your story with my father, the pastor, he would agree with me on this.
At this I nodded. Tears slipped down my cheeks unabashedly. I'd like you to tell your father about my story, Dr. Bernstone. I would appreciate his insight as a pastor who has a full appreciation of the demonic realm. Dr. Bernstone said nothing. He simply pushed the tissues on the table towards me. I quickly snapped one up and began to blow my nose furiously and wipe away my tears on the back of my sleeve.
Don't be embarrassed to cry, Lisa. On the contrary, I encourage crying. It's the people that don't cry I worry about the most. You've got to let out the grief. Otherwise it becomes trapped, and it becomes trauma in your cells. Tell me more about the strange feeling in the bedroom you got. Can you try and explain it, Lisa?
Well, it was very heavy. I'm sure you know, Dr. Bernstone, that carbon monoxide poisoning doesn't have a smell, which is why people don't know they're being poisoned, and why the gas is so incredibly lethal. This is why the authorities encourage people to have a carbon monoxide detector, along with a smoke detector, of course, in their homes. We did actually have a carbon monoxide detector, but it failed to work. The batteries had been inexplicably removed, and I know one thing, Dr. Bernstone, for sure. My father would never have removed those batteries, but something or someone had.
That is odd,
Dr. Bernstone agreed. When people are poisoned by carbon monoxide poisoning, Dr. Bernstone, the medical examiner told me they become disorientated, dizzy, and often have a pounding headache. But in my family's case, she emphatically believes they simply fell fast asleep watching television together and just never woke up. I believe there was evil in that room, Dr. Bernstone. I know I keep repeating myself on this, but I can't express it enough. And I do think it was conjured up, as you were saying, by my mother's Haitian friend Anna. I felt it strongly, like you might feel spices in the kitchen after you've cooked a curry. There was a god-awful smell in my parents' room as well, which I believe testified to this malignant presence. It was sulphurous, accompanied by the smell of a dead rat or something. It was so rank. The weirdest thing of all was there were these long black feathers left behind on the bed. I had absolutely no idea where they came from. I mean, how do you explain that, Dr. Bernstone? Why would my parents have black feathers on their bed? It made no sense at all. The police even asked me about the matter, They wanted to know where the feathers came from. What bird did they come from? And why were they on my parents' bed? Of course I could not give the police answers. How could I, Dr. Bernstone? It would mean telling them my absurd story. And I doubted they would believe a word of it. In their shoes, I certainly wouldn't. As my mother used to always say, some things are best not shared. And this story is one of those things. I do believe the winged creature left those dark feathers behind, on purpose, of course, as if the demon was telling me that he was very real and was not a figment of the imagination. I think that was the message he wanted to convey.
That's a very obvious possibility, Lisa. What did you do when you found your family dead? I imagine you called the emergency services at once. Is that right?
I did everything you do in an emergency situation. I called the emergency services, and when I did, all this weird static came on the telephone, so the woman at the other end could hardly hear a word I was saying. Let's just say I got the hell out of that bedroom. I knew I wasn't in there alone. That thing was there, and it was dangerous, and it was watching me. Later I was informed that the boiler in my parents' ensuite bathroom had been treacherously leaking out carbon monoxide poisoning into my parents' bedroom. It was an old boiler, but for it to leak like that, well, I don't understand it at all. I couldn't believe that it had wiped my whole family out. If I had not been out waitressing, I could have been watching the movie in their bed as well. I probably wouldn't be here either to tell you this tragic story.
How does that make you feel, Lisa, knowing you're the only one left in your family to survive this incident? Many people surviving a family tragedy feel a great sense of guilt that they survived the tragedy and their family did not. Do you think you feel guilty about this?
Absolutely, I do. I feel so terribly bad that my family lost their lives so needlessly, and that I'm still here. None of this feels right. I feel angry with myself, Dr. Bernstone. You see, when I returned home that night, I never thought to check on my family, even though the lights were on, in the upstairs bedroom and the kitchen. I just told myself it was the weekend, and maybe they were still up and about, but they don't normally stay up so late. And my family had been through so much tragedy, losing family members, and then there was my mother's nightmare where the winged creature had appeared in her dream. So you would have thought I'd have the common sense and the vigilance to pay greater attention to my environment. So I failed them. I failed them really badly. I guess I misleadingly thought that after Father Morgan Marshall had visited our house and blessed the place with holy water and prayers, that the curse had finally been lifted and gone away for good, and that everything would ultimately be all right. I never gave much thought to the fact that the father had not blessed my parents' bedroom and bathroom en suite, even though my mother was very troubled by that. That's why she was trying desperately to get someone to bless her room. I thought the evil had gone for good, because the house felt lighter, but I couldn't have been more wrong about that, Dr. Bernstone. I was such an idiot. If only I'd checked up on my family. I could have called the ambulance. Then maybe they would have been saved. I think about that an awful lot. It's very punishing to think about that, you know.
You must not beat yourself up about this, Lisa, said Dr. Bernstone. It is very possible that your family were beyond help by then, when you returned from your waitressing job. I suspect they'd long since been dead.
You think so, Dr. Bernstone? You really do?
Yes, I do, I'm afraid, Lisa. If it's any consolation, I don't think they would have suffered. They probably just suffocated in their sleep and drifted away. They would not have known a thing about it, like when you're given an anaesthetic in an operation. I imagine it would have been just like that.
Oh, I'm so glad you think that, Dr. Bernstone. That is a huge weight off my mind. You always worry, don't you? When the people you love died, you ask yourself again and again, did they suffer? I really hope that was the case for my parents. But the enigmatic feathers I found on the bed were a source of great discord for me. I couldn't help but wonder, Dr. Bernstone, if this evil entity stood there in the gloomy light of the bedroom and watched my family just die. I can't even bear to think about that, Dr. Bernstone. But I do believe that that is what happened.
I don't think you should go there, Lisa. You'll only be punishing yourself. You know that the medical examiner established that carbon monoxide killed your parents and your 2 siblings, caused from a faulty boiler. They have established that much. On a different train of thought, Lisa, I understand that you sold your parents' house as quickly as you possibly could after the event. Is that right?
I did, said Lisa. I couldn't stay at my parents' house a moment longer, nor could I live in the cottage, with all that dark, gloomy, inauspicious energy around. So I moved into a flat chair for a while, with one of the other waitresses I worked with at the diner. She took pity on me when she learnt the tragic news about my family's deaths. There's some good people out there, Dr. Bernstone, and she was one of them. So yes, I sold the house, but shortly after the buyer moved into our property, it went down in flames, and the fire started from the cottage where I'd been living. If I'd been there, God knows what would have happened to me. Get this, Dr. Bernstone. Even the fire brigade do not know what caused the fire. They are completely stumped by it. Foul play has been ruled out. Dr. Bernstone's eyes grew round.
No one was hurt, I hope, in that fire?
No, the family that purchased the house from me were on holiday, would you believe it? They returned home to find their house was a pile of ash. Since then they've rebuilt my former family home, with the insurance money they received. It looks pretty good these days, completely different to the house they purchased from me. But very nice at the same time. Personally, I'm very glad the place burnt down. I can only hope the evil has finally gone.
That's extraordinary, Lisa. Absolutely extraordinary that the house went down in flames. I don't know what to say about that.
You don't have to say anything, Dr. Bernstone. I'm grateful you're listening to my story. I'm not looking for sympathy of any kind, if that's what you're thinking. I really don't want people's pity. That's the last thing I want. I just want the tools to live my life as productively as I can, to overcome the grief that has held me to ransom every day of my life.
That's why I'm here, Lisa. Tell me, do you feel better having talked about this?
You know something, Dr. Bernstone? I think I do. I really do. By all accounts, I was very surprised by how good it felt to talk to Dr. Bernstone about the tragic incident that had taken my family's lives away so needlessly. Talking about how they met their end was like a heavy weight being lifted off my shoulders. Being able to talk about it in such an open and honest way really was a relief. I thought talking about the curse and about how I had discovered my family dead in my parents' sumptuously cosy bed would make me feel all the more traumatized. But the irony was that talking through everything enabled me to heal in ways I never imagined possible. These days I'm glad to say I was sleeping, eating and living better and enjoying my life more than I had done in a long time. I found myself feeling a profound sense of gratitude that I was still alive. I'd noticed things like the colours of bright red geraniums in the plant pots at the apartment, or how blue the sky was, and I realised how lucky I was to still be very much alive. Furthermore, against all the odds, I was always looking forward to my therapy sessions with Dr. Bernstone. When I left his offices, I felt lighter, more upbeat, and very positive. Ostensibly, Mr. Bernstone made me realise that despite my losses in life, that life was still good, and I could still look forward to a bright and promising future, even if my family were no longer in it. Before long, I'm ashamed to admit, I found myself falling for Dr. Bernstone hard, rather like a teenager who has a huge crush on a celebrity or rock star. I couldn't help falling for Dr. Bernstone. He was so kind, so generous, so sympathetic, and such an excellent listener, paying close attention to everything I said. Furthermore, he really believed my story about the family curse. He was the only person who had listened to me about all my tumultuous struggles. I even shared with him the very real fear I harboured, that the hideous winged demonic entity with the red eyes, that I believed was behind the carbon monoxide poisoning of my family members, would come after me too. Dr. Bernstone thought it was unlikely. He thought that the winged creature would have taken me out a long time ago, if he'd wanted to. He thought I was safe, and I so wanted to believe he was right about that. One bit of information I did not volunteer to him was that even in my new apartment that I'd recently purchased that I shared with Pringle, I would still sometimes have the feeling of being watched, and sometimes catch sight of a dark shadow in the corner of the room. But I persuaded myself that was all in my head. Dr. Bernstone was the one that brought a ray of hope to my life. He lifted the burden of a great guilt I'd been carrying off my shoulders. He made me see that I could have done nothing to save my family, and so he had significantly helped ease the survivor's guilt that had plagued me for so long. I found myself wondering if Dr. Bernstone was actually married. When I was away from my therapy sessions with him, I thought of him all the time. I had noticed there was no wedding band on his finger, and that gave me a smidgen of hope. You would have thought that such a chivalrous, charming gentleman like Dr. Bernstone would have been snapped up a long time ago by a lovely lady. I wondered if perhaps there was a girlfriend on the scene, and the thought that he might indeed be taken did not sit well with me. When I returned to my apartment after a session with Dr. Bernstone, I didn't feel so dreadfully lost. My relationship with my mother's cat Pringles had grown very strong. I loved that cat like my mother had done, and in my sequestered lonely moments, when I felt forsaken and vulnerably alone, Pringles was there for me, cuddling up to me and offering me much comfort. I realized I was more than a little obsessed with Dr. Bernstone. If my mother were still alive, she would tell me it wasn't remotely healthy to be this preoccupied with a professional therapist. She'd have been sure to knock some sense in me. It was my loneliness and isolation that made my feelings toward Dr. Bernstone all the more intense. I would begin to imagine our lives together as a happily married couple. I knew I was being idealistic, romantic, and whimsically naive. I was Dr. Bernstone's patient, for goodness sake, but I couldn't help the passionate way I felt about him. When I thought about him, all the pain of the past seemed to be extinguished, as if it had all but melted away, as being around him made me feel so much lighter, so much more whole. Dr. Bernstone made me think of the future, as if there really was hope on the horizon for me, like a rainbow in the sky, after a very hostile, insufferable storm had soon passed. He made me believe there was a chance to begin again, with a new slate. He had been the one who had unbound some of the shackles of my grief, and made life more bearable for me, like he'd done with the young woman Dr. McGregor told me about, whom had lost her entire family in a raging inferno due to a house fire that had seemingly got out of control. I wondered if this very same woman had also developed romantic feelings toward Dr. Bernstone, like I had done. I was sure Dr. Bernstone had feelings for me, unless of course I was deluding myself, which was a real possibility. Surely he could sense there was an attraction between us, unless this attraction was only one-sided. I realized that I needed him to know about the way I felt towards him. I had learnt to talk openly and freely about my feelings during our sessions together, so why should I keep this from him? I mean, if he felt the same way as I did, then there could potentially be a future for the both of us. I promptly decided I would tell him about my feelings towards him. At the next therapy session,
"You're looking bright and chirpy today,"
said Dr. Bernstone jovially, when I entered his offices, and sank down onto the soft sofa, picking up a bright orange throw cushion and holding it tightly to my chest like a stuffed toy. I always did this when I visited his offices, as a self-soothing gesture. "It's thanks to you, Dr. Bernstone. I'm feeling a lot lighter these days. You've helped me exponentially, you really have. You've helped me to learn to live with my grief, and I'm very grateful for that. You've made life so much more bearable for me. I've experienced some dark days, of course I have, but let's just say getting out of bed these days has become an awful lot easier. It's not a laborious struggle anymore, like it used to be. I'm not sure if I'll ever be normal again, Dr. Bernstone, whatever normal is, but I'm getting there slowly and surely, and you've helped me a whole lot. You really have."
"Good, I'm very glad to hear that, Lisa. That's why I'm here to help you make sense of everything, and to help you navigate your way through it all. You know as well as I do that dark, gloomy days will sometimes come your way, and they will get you down on occasion. But the good thing is you're overcoming and mastering your grief. You've made some significant, very impressive progress. You should be very proud of yourself, Lisa. You should be extremely proud of yourself. Most of the hard work of getting through this muddied fog has come from your courageous efforts to overcome your adversity. So how is your week been, Lisa? Is there anything you feel that you need to talk about in our session today?"
he asked me cordially. I drew in a deep breath as I tried to think about how I was going to open up my heart to Dr. Bernstone in this therapy session, as I had no way of knowing how he'd react to what I was about to convey to him. But I wasn't going to be a wuss all my life. I needed to boldly take the bull by the horns and tell him exactly how I was feeling, even if it meant being rebuffed. It was a risk I'd have to take. I could feel my heart thumping violently in my ears at the anticipation of it all.
"Are you all right, Lisa?"
Dr. Bernstone asked me, looking a tad worried.
"I sensed you've suddenly come a little uptight. Your shoulders are hunched together. Is something worrying you? Would you like to discuss it? You know me. I'm a very good listening ear."
"Must we talk about me, Dr. Bernstone? We always talk about me. I find it so boring, so repetitive, talking about myself all the time. Let's not kid. My life isn't exactly riveting, is it? I really would like this session to be talking about you, if we may. I've been coming to see you now for over a year, yet ironically I know nothing about you at all. I don't even know your first name, believe it or not. And that is kind of bizarre, given you always call me Lisa."
"You're my patient, Lisa. The sessions we enjoy together are to discuss you and your life. We come together as a team to talk about your feelings so that together we can work through your grief. These trauma therapy sessions are not about me, Lisa. They have never been about me. I am very satisfied we are making excellent and steady progress. And as I was saying, I cannot reiterate enough how much credit you deserve for your remarkable accomplishments. You have been resolutely determined to overcome your grief, and you need to be commended for that. Look at you. These days you are no longer a prisoner in your apartment. You regularly walk your neighbour's spaniel to get good exercise. You've joined a pottery class for recreation. You've been showing an interest in starting up your own beauty therapy business, something you've always wanted to do. These sessions are not about me. I'm your doctor. You are my patient. That is how this works. You do understand that, don't you, Lisa?"
"Of course I do, Dr. Bernstone. But don't you see, I want this session to be about you, Dr. Bernstone. I want to know all about you. I only know that you have a father who's a pastor, and that's about all about you I know. What is your first name, Dr. Bernstone? I don't even know that. I can't believe I don't even know your first name. That's kind of shocking, don't you think? Especially since I've been seeing you for over a year." Dr. Bernstone shifted rather awkwardly in his chair. He didn't look desperately comfortable with me asking him all these personal, upfront questions, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted to know everything about him. I'd fallen hopelessly in love with him. I needed for him to know about these feelings of mine, and for the first time in my life I wasn't actually afraid to put them out there. Dr. Bernstone was the kindest person I'd ever met. I couldn't help but think we'd be so good together as a couple. If only he'd admit to his feelings towards me. I knew he liked me, or was I deluding myself about that? Had I imagined that there was an attraction and a connection between us, when there really wasn't? I didn't want to consider the latter, even a remote possibility. Please, God, I thought. Please may Dr. Bernstone fancy me, as much as I fancied him. Otherwise, after my confession to him, I was going to look like a prize idiot, with egg splashed all over my face.
"My name is Neil," Dr. Bernstone told me.
"Neil, that's a cool name," I said reflectively. "I really like it. It suits you, Dr. Bernstone. Can I call you Neil, Dr. Bernstone? You call me Lisa, after all, so fair's fair, don't you think?"
"If you want to call me by my first name, Lisa, by all means do so. You are welcome to do so."
"Thanks, I appreciate that. I hate formality. I just feel, Neil, I don't know anything about you at all. But I do know you're the kindest person I've ever met. And, well, I don't know how to say this to you, but I think I'm falling in love with you. You're not married, are you, Neil? You don't have a serious girlfriend, do you, by any chance?" I studied his face curiously, to see any telltale clues that might tell me whether he did indeed have a significant other, but I saw no sign of this on his face. For a moment Dr. Bernstone said nothing. His nose twitched rather like a rabbit, while his kind eyes were quick to avoid my inquiring gaze. I dare say he didn't like being put on the spot like this, and I couldn't blame him for that. He was finding our conversation, I suspect, excruciatingly uncomfortable. Finally he spoke.
No, I'm not married, Lisa, and I'm flattered that you think you are in love with me. But as you yourself say, you don't know anything about me. You think you're in love with me, but you're not in love with me. I can assure you of that. You come here to these sessions to talk about your issues with me. I listen. It's very common for patients to end up feeling this way about their doctors. But we can talk our way through these feelings you believe you have for me. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's more common than you may know for patients to develop feelings for their therapists. When someone is around you for long enough and is interested in what you have to say, it's easy to falsely assume you have feelings for that person, because you feel there is a connection. Everyone wants to feel heard and listened to, and it's easy to confuse those feelings for infatuation or love. It happens very frequently, believe it or not, and you're not the first patient to express feelings of love towards me. I've been through this before, you know.
I thought that might be the case, Neil. I think it's very easy to fall in love with you. But the way I feel about you is not in my head, I promise you it's not. I think about you all the time, Neil. When I leave your offices, you're all I can think about. I think about when I'm going to see you again, and I can hardly wait. I've been thinking about how good we would be together, if we became an item, that is.
Look, Lisa, as I was saying, I'm extremely flattered you feel this way about me. Or at least you think you feel this way about me. But I do hope you know nothing could ever happen between us. It is not possible. I am your doctor. You are my patient. It is unethical and illegal to get involved with your patients. These ethics need to be respected and adhered to at all times. The line between a patient and doctor can never be crossed. You're in a very vulnerable, fragile place at this time in your life, Lisa. No one can dispute that for a second, especially not me, having worked with you through all your trauma. Look at what happened to you. Your entire family has been wiped out. If I was to engage in a relationship with you, I would be doing a deplorable, disingenuous thing, taking advantage of a very vulnerable woman such as yourself. In the circumstances, I would immediately be struck off, and rightly so, for it would be a despicable thing to do.
But don't you see, I don't have to be a patient with you any more, Neil. I could stop these sessions we have together. Then we could be together. I love you, Neil. I think I knew that from the first time I met you. That was why I confided in you about the curse that Anna afflicted on our family. There is chemistry between us, isn't there? You have to admit it, I said, staring at Dr. Bernstone so eagerly, rather like a kid hoping her father would let her have another cookie, but rather feeling her wishes would not be fulfilled. I am not sure what I was expecting Dr. Bernstone to say. Maybe I wanted him to declare his undying love for me in return, but that was not going to happen, and I was left feeling bitterly disappointed and very rejected. I think I had psychologically prepared myself for some kind of rejection, but when it happened, it wasn't so easy to receive. I knew that Dr. Bernstone was a principled man, and getting involved with one of his patients would not be something he would undertake very gladly. Surely there were exceptions to those rules, I thought. If we both confessed our love for each other, how could we be judged for our feelings? In that moment I reminded myself that Neil had not even mentioned that he had any feelings towards me. All the feelings I thought he had for me, were they in my head? Had I got this all horribly wrong? Were my affections for him completely one-sided? I was beginning to feel humiliated and rather foolish. Dr. Bernstein's face was flushing. It had grown as pink as a peony. He was still not meeting my eyes. If he really didn't have feelings for me, surely it would be easy for him to look at me directly, unless, of course, I'd embarrassed him significantly, which was a high probability. I understood, of course, that he was my doctor, but there were ways we could get around this, surely. If only he would admit to me that he had feelings for me. But I could sense he was resolutely determined to keep things between us strictly professional. I don't want to sound like a broken record, Lisa, but these romantic feelings you claim to have towards me are all in your head. It's not a two-way streak, I'm afraid. I can't reciprocate those feelings. My heart sank like a heavy stone in a large body of water. There it was. Neil had admitted he didn't feel the same way towards me as I felt towards him. He couldn't have been clearer than that.
"I'm your doctor, Lisa," he repeated. "I like you very much, don't get me wrong. You're an attractive woman, and whoever gets to marry you one day will be a very lucky man indeed. I hope you know that you are my patient and that boundaries between us cannot be crossed. As I was telling you, I am not married, nor do I have a girlfriend, but that really hasn't got anything to do with you. I broke up with my fiancé 3 weeks ago, so yes, I was engaged to be married at one point, but it came to nothing. I want to make it clear that currently I'm not looking for a relationship with anyone, and certainly not with someone as vulnerable as yourself. That would be crossing a line that I am not willing to cross. It would be extremely unethical. If you're uncomfortable with the way things currently stand between us, Lisa, I could easily refer you to another psychologist. That would not be a problem. But I cannot continue, I'm sure you appreciate, being your psychologist if you keep viewing me through a romantic lens. It would not be appropriate. You are infatuated with me, Lisa, and that's very common among patients. Very common indeed, and we can work through this very easily together. Don't get me wrong. I'm very glad you feel you could have a relationship with someone. It shows how well you are doing. I'm very proud of your accomplishments to date, and so should you be. For a long while, I would like to remind you, you couldn't even envisage a future for yourself, let alone a relationship. And yet you've come a long way now. I want you to know the feelings you think you have for me are not real, but they are a sign that you are beginning to heal. And that is a promising start. It really is.
But I want a future with you, Neil. I've fallen in love with you, don't you see that? I want us to be together. We can be discreet, I promise you. I won't tell anybody about our relationship, so that we don't get into trouble. I'm sure you feel something for me, Dr. Bernstone. It can't be in my head. I can see it in your eyes. You're attracted to me. Why don't you admit it? At least be big enough to admit it to me. I couldn't believe I was saying all this to Dr. Bernstone, and putting him directly on the spot like this, as moments before he had said very clearly that he didn't have any feelings towards me. Yet I kept bulldozing through this conversation, hoping that he would finally confess to feeling at least something.
Lisa, how many times do we need to go over this? Now I want to say this very clearly. You think I like you. You think I fancy you. It's very difficult not to get attached to your patients, you know. So of course I like you, and I think you're a very attractive woman. But that is it. I always try to keep the professional distance between me and my patients. If I didn't, I would go home every night caught up in the tangle of my patients' issues. I have to make a strong divide between my private and my professional life. If you're entertaining any other ideas about me romantically, Lisa, then I think we should call it quits right now, before I end up hurting you. You've been through enough hurt in your life, and I don't want to add to it. It's not healthy for you to be talking to me like this. You know nothing about me. You cannot be in love with someone you barely know.
Dr. Bernstone began to scribble something on a piece of paper. He handed it over to me.
This is the name of a very good psychologist. I recommend you see her, Lisa. I think we can agree that it won't be healthy to continue our sessions together in the current circumstances, unless you are willing to work through these feelings with me. Otherwise, it's for the better that we part company. I'm sorry, but I cannot reciprocate your feelings. Anything you have with me is strictly professional, and that is the way I want it to remain. But if you can't see beyond that, then it's best you see someone else.
I snatched the paper angrily from Dr. Bernstone's hands. I was tempted to tear it up in front of his face. I had certainly not expected him to rebuff me like this, and it really hurt me. But then I'm not sure what I expected. I could see that Dr. Bernstone was resolutely determined. He had meant every word he said, and that there could be no romantic relationship with us. He claimed the feelings between us were not real. They were all in my head. Could he be right about that? Did I think I was in love with him because he listened to me when I had hit the lowest and darkest place in my life, a place so dreadfully bleak I couldn't wish it on my worst enemy? What he said was perfectly true, of course. No one I'd ever met listened to me like he did. I had to remind myself that Dr. Bernstone was paid to listen to his patients, rattling on and on about themselves, much like I had done in the last year or so. Was that why I thought I was in love with him? Because he cared enough to listen to my ramblings? I walked out of Dr. Bernstone's office, feeling as if I had been hit across the face with a baseball bat. How could I have been so blind-sighted, so stupid? Maybe Dr. Bernstone was right, and my infatuation towards him was like a pathetic schoolgirl crush. I was a messed-up human being, I knew that. I had lost my entire family to a devastating tragedy. Who in their right mind would want to get involved with the likes of me anyway? I was a wreck in every way. Of course I understood that patients often fell for their doctors, and that stood to reason. My relationship with Dr. Bernstone rarely felt different. I could talk to him so easily, so effortlessly. Everything flowed so smoothly when I was in his company. There was a kindred connection between us, but it didn't mean it was romantic. I belligerently stormed out of Dr. Bernstone's office. I failed to say my goodbyes to the receptionist, for the embarrassment I felt from being snubbed was immense. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.